Welcome in, adventurers, heroes, and ne'er-do-wells to another episode of the Cloaks Capes Podcast. I, of course, am your first host and a humble DM, Robbie Landis. With me is Dungeon Mistress Callie, and our guest this time is none other than the buff DM himself, Ethan. Ethan, thank you so much for coming in and giving us some of your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for asking and for running this podcast. People who run podcasts and create content about the TTRPG community, that's what keeps the community going. So thank you.
Oh, you are very welcome. And we've actually, since starting this is when we sort of got back into TikTok and just been a little bit more active across, more of the content creation sites. And it's been a lot more, I think, exciting. And people just engaging with us a lot more. I don't know if it's the difference between more of like a, cool official, hey, they actually look like they know what they're doing setup as opposed to what I was doing before. But here we are, nonetheless.
That really is the key, though, isn't it? Look like you know what you're doing. You don't have to, but you have to look like it.
Isn't that what Galinda says in Wicked? It's not about aptitude. It's about how you're viewed.
Oh, my.
Make it till you make it, right?
Not to derail and talk about something else, but
now we can talk about it.
My God, did Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo kill it?
Nothing matters, but nothing
so
matters.
Yeah, okay, so as a Final Fantasy XIV fan, I stand Jonathan Bailey appearing in anything. My beloved Catboy, my wife's obsession, Jonathan Bailey. Him doing freaking Dancing Through Life was everything for me. Sorry, let's talk about tabletop.
That was a very immediate derail.
Sorry,
didn't even leave the station and it crashed.
It will lead into the second half of our show today, talking about consequences. But where I want to start before that is, this is the second episode in a row now where we have granted, I'm pretty sure most people we've had on the show have at least some or majority of their experience DMing, I think. But for today's, we wanted to talk about a topic, and that is, as a dungeon master, when you prepare things for your players, how do you create situations so that you don't either have expectations or you're not pushing or leading players into a certain pathway? Yeah. This is something that I think, especially when you're homebrewing, it's easy to get stuck in, because when you're playing certain modules, they present quite a bit for you. They sometimes even give you here are the pathways that might happen. What I've noticed about myself, and I tried to change, or that I've been trying to change most recently in my campaign, I suppose Callie, being one of my players, it would be up to you to let me know if I've been successful at it or not. But I had led them into a tomb of some evil that got let out, that was supposed to be sealed in there. And there's a good chance they would get sealed in there. They did. And so as I'm creating this, I'm like, I better have a way for them to get out. And I had stopped myself, because when I do that, at least, the first thing that I think a lot of players do is they want to make perception checks, investigation checks. What do I see, right? And I found that I tend to, even if I try not to, as they sort of do those, I kind of lead them towards any pre-made solutions, which isn't necessarily bad, but we'll start with you, Ethan. What are some of your thoughts on this idea of having answers maybe already there and readily available for players in situations?
Just really quickly, I just need to say what an asshole I would be if I was just on the show you suck at that. Were you trying to do that? Not great.
There are ways you could have been more diplomatic about it. If that is the truth, you could have been yes, you have been getting better at that, Robbie.
Yes, you have been making an attempt at that.
Excellent, great. I need to make a quick note for Monday's game.
Kill
for a new
this
co-host.
Character. But your question, there's so much in there, from the notion of player agency, the idea of railroading, and how much guidance is too much guidance. But the way you used the word situations, and that touches onto a phrase that I like to use, and that is, as dungeon masters, we create situations, not solutions. Now, to take your tomb example, that doesn't mean you can't go into it with some ideas. It's almost impossible to not have some ideas spinning around in your head as you create that. Like, well, how could they get out? Well, it's possible to lift the door. There's this hidden pathway here.
What would I do if I was a player?
Right, exactly. That's part of prep, is thinking about what they might do. But it's the might. Because if you get too wedded to the idea, then you are going to push them in a particular direction. So a few things that I would do in that situation. You mentioned if I had an idea for how to get them out and they asked for a perception check, I might guide them to it. Well, one of the fun things that I think is to do, sometimes I've noticed DMs, when players roll perception checks, you either see the thing or you don't. But sometimes you might roll a 5, and then you could say, you see this loose brick over here, and it really looks like it might be like a secret handle or a secret door. It's nothing, but that might spur some ideas. But I think a lot of it is, as dungeon masters, not pre-planning too much. We're not writing a novel.
Right.
If we want to write a novel, go write a novel. You can pre-plan anything you want. And I think a reason that a lot of DMs get wedded to ideas is because they're cool. I have this room I really want them to go down or go into. They enter a dungeon and it splits hallways, and there's room A and room B. And I'm really excited about room A. Room B, I could take or leave. So I might, quote unquote, railroad the players into that area because I think this is cool. But I think it's important to remember, if players totally circumvent what you had planned, just put it in your back pocket and use it later. Yes. It can be for another campaign, another situation, another room, the same general idea, just reworked. And I think that another key component of this conversation, though it's something that wasn't directly mentioned, is a fear of failure. Yeah. Both on the part of the players and the DMs, as if failure is losing the game. But failure leads to a lot of interesting things. And so you might not have come up with any ideas for how to get out of the tomb, but you are willing to entertain their ideas. But maybe they don't come up with one. Okay, so they're trapped. Now what?
Yeah, now what do we do?
That's interesting. Lord of the Rings, most of the interesting things that happen, if this were a D&D game, would be the result of failures. Boromir's death, spoiler. Boromir's death, that's losing a fight. That's a failed death save roll.
Following on that, folly is the basis of all storytelling. Mm-hmm. Boromir's betrayal of Frodo and wanting to take the ring, it's just a failed wisdom save, right? Uh-huh. Like, that's all that happened right there, is he failed the check to resist the temptation of the ring, and that's what sets the events of the party splitting into motion.
The bringing Smeagol along, well, that's multiple failed insight checks. The whole situation with the Lemnis bread and Sam and Frodo, that was failed persuasion, failed insight. All these things lead to interesting consequences. And so, long and short, to answer just that first question, I think a lot of it is realize your players are often going to tell a more interesting story than you could have planned. And
Always.
Just being willing to relinquish that control and trust yourself enough to be able to adapt to whatever they throw at you. That, combined with realizing failure's okay. Failure's interesting.
And to the players, the advice that I would give, the failure is interesting thing. Obviously, when we make a success, right? If a spell lands, if a hit lands, the DM's like, tell us how it goes. Don't be afraid to also describe your failures as well.
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned something in your example about, maybe you roll a 5 to do some sort of perception, and a DM mentions a loose brick. You as the player know with a 5, you didn't just find the secret tunnel, right? So you're just like, oh, all right, cool, I failed. Take time to investigate that. Make that part of the story, because that can still be interesting. There was my favorite example, because there's a lot of things, and I'm especially going through this right now with some newer players in one of our games who when they have a chance to go shopping or when I, give an NPC to them, they're like, I don't really get why we're doing this or what this matters. Or they think because I'm doing this, this must play into the story somehow.
That part.
Not necessarily. And so there's an example recently on Misfits and Magic season 2. This won't be too spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen that on Dimension 20. But at one point, Brennan's character gets to interact with an NPC and explains to them what a fjord is. And then later realizes he made a mistake in how he defined it. So he wants to take somebody's phone, FaceTime that person to correct it, right? That could have been a 30-second thing. But, and obviously they're performers, right? But just still, as an example, Brennan just saw in his head a moment where he's like, oh no, I misdefined this thing. I want to tell this NPC the real way about it. And Abria used that as a moment to have that NPC reveal something about somebody else's character that was profound for Brennan. Still wasn't anything plot related. It was purely character related. But this idea of, oh yeah, there's a loose brick. Oh, well, I know that's a failure. Why should I do anything with that? Is because that could be a piece of the puzzle that gives inspiration to another character to make a bigger idea, a different idea, or something that does lead somewhere.
But even if it doesn't, even if the way you react to being told there's a loose brick doesn't progress you getting out of the tomb, it's still an opportunity. And I think that's the way, I think that's a very mature view of failure as a player and DM is opportunity. I have a player who just begs me to hurt his character. Like, please let me be the one who dies. Please let me fail. Absolutely. That's awesome. That's interesting. And that's, if you view it as an opportunity, you're not upset really by any role. And if you as the DM view the player's failures and successes as opportunities, again, by not planning this is the solution, because like you said, a lot of players, when they're used to video games or things like that, might be thinking, okay, DM, what's the answer? What is the thing you want us to do?
Right. We're trying to get to your answer.
What is the thing you want? And you'll get this a lot after sessions when they don't succeed at doing something. Maybe they failed to find a trap, failed to find the secret room, failed to find a way to kill the BBEG, whatever. And they go, what were we supposed to do?
I've had Callie come to me. Yes, I've had Callie come to me and be like, what's your plans here? What are you expecting or hoping us to do? Are we supposed to fight the hag, or do you want us to talk to her? And I'm like, Callie, I cannot tell you this enough times. You guys are making the decisions.
Now,
I'm guilty of it.
One thing I do want to say, despite what I just said, some games take tables, specifically with systems like Fate, might take the collaborative storytelling aspect to a even higher level and plan out some beats. That's okay if that's how your table wants to play. If your table is like, okay, what direction do we want to go here ahead of time with the story? That's acceptable. Yep. It's a type of improv with just more beats to move towards.
With more guidelines.
Nothing wrong with that, but I think it's very dangerous in games that aren't like that to answer that question of what were we supposed to do? I don't know. You could have tried other things, I'm sure.
So, I have to talk about this. It's just, we mentioned Rosalind in the pre-show, and that is absolutely my character, where she's a tank. And I wanted to experiment with playing a tanky character in Dungeons and Dragons, which really doesn't have a lot of great mechanics.
I'd also just like to add a little bit of context here too. Callie is like Will Wheaton levels of bad luck on rolls.
That's true. So
we also needed to design a subclass for her.
Designed a subclass for bad rolls.
Pretty much. Well, not tanking, bad rolls specific. Well, actually, we do have that too with
we
the
do the Jinx Warlock. Yeah,
but specifically, this is our protection paladin. Was more about how can I take damage for other
my friends,
people as opposed to being. Obviously, dealing damage is cool. You have double crit smite before in a single turn.
Feels cool.
It's mostly about how can I make sure that I take damage instead of other people taking damage.
And to that end, and Ethan, your point, like those can be parts of the moment. My favorite moments for Rosalind are describing the injuries that she sustains and her ability to, push herself back up to her feet and keep going. Like, that's what defines her as a person, is she never quits. And I think that's really interesting. But taking it kind of back to this idea of giving your players a scene that does not have a ready-made solution, I'm a big believer in that, because your players will come up with some insane shit that you never would have thought of, and you're like, oh, that's either that's crazy, and I love it, or it's not crazy and I love it. My party, and we did Descent into Avernus, and I took it way further. They were down on the 8th level of the Hells. They were breaking into Mephistopheles' vault because they needed to get to a demigod's plane, and the only tuning fork to get to that demi plane was in Mephistopheles' vault. So they're breaking in.
Here for it.
And so they have to pass through the 9 gates of his vault to get in, and which I immediately, why did I make it 9 gates? Now I need to come up with 9 puzzles.
Because 9
why
layers.
did I do that? Exactly. Why did I do that to myself?
Just do it like
it
Oblivion did the Oblivion gates and make it just repeating the same 3 things
precisely
over and over and over.
But so one of them were the gates of life and death, and the gate of life was no problem because any living thing can pass through the gate. So anything that is not living can't, but any living thing can. The next one was the gate of death, and only dead things can pass through it. So the party gets now stuck in this room where to get to the next one, they need something dead to pass through, and they don't have anything dead. And so they literally sat there going, what do we do? How do we progress? And and they kept asking me for like more insight and more questions, and I gave them little bits and pieces, but I didn't give them anything towards a solution. And finally, the paladin in the party, who has only recently joined the party, everyone else has been in the party for a long time. The paladin's new, but the paladin looks at this group of friends who have grown close over all this time and says, I'll open the gate for us. And she committed suicide, or had them kill her, so that she could pass through the gate and open it for them and let them all through.
Memorable. Your players will remember that.
It was this incredible moment. And only after they did that, when they were getting ready to leave the room, and one of the party goes, hey, wait a minute. Do you remember 20 sessions ago when we saved that angel who was imprisoned in hell, and she gave us the last pinion off her dying wings? And the pinion was a true resurrection feather, and they were able to get their paladin back, but they hadn't remembered that until after they did it.
That's so cool.
And it was incredible. It was because I had forgotten that I'd given that to them at that point.
Right.
I just thought at the time, it's a cool thing I'll give you, and now you have it if you need it.
And if you as the DM had cleaved too hard to your preconceived notions of how to solve this, that may never have happened.
It was beautiful. And I gave her this great moment, because I was sitting there thinking oh, this actually might just be the end of your character. So I gave her this great moment of where she dies, and she is able to she gets to see her family who died so long ago, and it's this beautiful ending of where she overcame having been a servant to a devil, and she freed herself, and she became a paladin again, and then she died a hero despite everything. And I'm like, this is so good.
And that's so amazing. And I also wanted to build off of something you said a while back, Robbie. I'm sorry to call back.
No, please, please.
You mentioned how people narrate and describe their successes. Every time, almost, it's very common at tables, you roll a critical hit. Oh, describe that.
What does it look like?
But I want to know what your critical fails look like, too.
Yes.
Why did you fail so badly on this? And I want the players to think about that, especially sometimes when it's something they shouldn't have failed that easily. And when you give them the opportunity, it becomes more interesting than just, I miss. Mm-hmm. No, I slip on the blood that's there, or maybe I get caught up in the moment. I'm
focused on the cleric who took that hit and 2 turns ago.
Ethan, can we be friends?
Oh, please. That is more character development. We have the same
philosophy on this. Yes. I love it.
That's more character development than a nat 20 gives you.
Yeah, well, and when that nat 20 does come, after describing how you've been struggling for the past 3 or 4 turns, now describing your crit hit that just happened to also finish off whatever you were fighting, that's going to feel so much more epic now.
And look, what you just said about the idea of sometimes this happens on things that you should be good at, right? And I think those are the best times.
Right.
I remember once with our bard, they just wanted to, busk in the tavern, right? They just wanted to perform, and they bombed their performance roll. And so I asked them, I'm like, okay, you're a 10th level bard at this point. You can perform in any tavern in the world.
Almost literally in your sleep.
Almost literally in your sleep. So you just bombed in front of what should have been the easiest crowd in the world. Why? What's going on in your character's mind?
Because
what happened where they're distracted?
Is a collaborative story. And I think it's so important to remember that it isn't two teams sitting at the table. Yes, I get to control the enemies too.
Yes.
But all of us sitting at the table, have a singular, unified goal. And that is to tell an interesting, fun, memorable story. That's it. That's our whole job together.
Yeah. I have, I run a Thursday game and a Sunday game. And it is a new thing I'm experimenting with where it is one story and both parties are telling separate parts of the story.
Oh, hell yeah. It's almost like West Marches.
Yes, kind of. And they've only recently started to become aware that the other party exists and is working towards their same goal, even if in a very different way.
Get to have them at the same table eventually.
Eventually. Oh, yeah. Well, that's going to be like the ending when I get to have them kind of meet for the first time. That'll be super cool. But so they... occasionally one of the parties will do something that affects the other party. And we just had a moment like that where one of the parties, one of their characters is dating, effectively, she's now engaged to the Queen of the Dawn Court, to Tanya. And they are... they're getting close. They have a very awkward relationship because she's a mortal dating this fey queen, and so
Titania.
they're very alien to one another. But it's this really cute romance because she's trying, and so they do this whole sequence where it ends up cursing an NPC in the other party. And they definitely felt some kind of way about that, where they're like, I don't necessarily like that a decision that I made cursed an NPC in the other party and is now making trouble for them. Like, I don't want to make their lives hard. And so I assured her, of course, like, well, to be clear, that NPC is always going to get cursed in some way. You just provided the flavor for how it happened because I need them to get cursed for the story. But ultimately, that session, because of the curse, we got to see that NPC for the first time in the campaign sober. We got to see them own responsibility for something that they did, face some of their own past traumas, and ask for help in something. And they grew more in that first session than they had in the entire campaign before that. And it was this great story moment because of that.
Look, going to go English major here for a second.
Boom.
The hero's journey, the liminal process, is you start here and you have to descend into chaos or hell.
Go into hell first.
And then you come out stronger. You can't just go straight up. It's a fluctuating wave.
Your teacher has to die and you have to go to hell. That's the rule. I didn't make it up.
Find a mentor. No, Homer did. Because Telemachus literally goes down into hell. Yeah. Like, it's the most literal representation.
Yes.
But so yeah, I think you've both given me so many different examples here of being able to segue into this next part. But the second part of this conversation that I wanted to have, we have situations, how to create them, how to set your players up. I want to talk about consequences now. And I'm going to go off of the story that you just told us a few minutes ago, Callie, about the paladin that had died, especially because I feel like for a lot of people, players, DMs, everyone everywhere in all the tabletop RPG spaces feels a certain kind of way about the quote unquote consequences of death. There are like sort of two sides to this argument, I think, and there's a lot of in between that death is the consequence, right? If your character dies, that's it. Go make a new one. That's the consequence of failing. Sometimes. But Callie, you had such a great example because obviously she died for a very, very good cause, for a great story beat.
Yeah, it was amazing.
But then they were able to bring her back as well. Does that mean that she suffered no consequences for her actions?
No, not at all. She didn't. She like, again, they didn't know they had the true resurrection opinion, right? I guess in some ways they might have known, but like they hadn't thought of that at the time. It was a decision they made. And also, they didn't know it was going to work. The angel told them what it was, but that doesn't mean that that's what it was or that's what it would have done. And even if they did, it still is a great moment. It's like
not to mention coming back from the dead. should change you a little.
You definitely should. You
Yes.
definitely feel a little different once you've died.
Yeah.
It's an experience.
I've argued with so many people about this idea because people are like, oh, look, if you can just use magic to just bring them back and wave it off, then death doesn't mean anything. And it's like that opinion or that way of thinking, I think, is so short-sighted. If you think that coming back from death doesn't change you or shouldn't change you in some way. I don't think at any of my tables we've never had a permanent player death. We've had a lot of
I hope
players
you wouldn't
die, though.
I'm glad you haven't had a permanent player death. Maybe
Sorry,
permanent character?
Character death.
People always use that.
I just
that
have to
Star
distinguish
Wars,
them.
People always use that Star Wars meme when I say that with Padme and Anakin. Player character, right, Robbie?
The reason I'm so big on, and then I want to get back to exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
The reason I'm pedantic about player versus character is because it helps to deal with bleed.
Yes. No, 100%. That's actually a
my
future
character
topic we're
is
gonna be
angry.
talking about.
Yeah,
Yes.
my
Player
character,
is
I'm
not.
So yes, we have never had a permanent character death before, but we've had a lot of characters being resurrected, and we use the fading spirit rule, which I learned from Critical Role. I'm not sure where they got it from, where the more times you're resurrected, the harder it is to resurrect you, right? And so I'm always, really big on narrating those sequences, and I think one of my favorite ones was when Callie's character Ember died and got to talk to not one, not two, but 3 extra planar entities.
Yeah.
A devil showed up to basically be like, no, well, here we are. Didn't work out, but you're coming with me now. The Raven Queen kicked in the door and basically booted him back to hell, being like, you have no power here.
You have no power here,
This
devil.
is my realm.
I mean,
And then sent her on to talk to the Wild Mother, who after resurrection ritual
Sarenrae.
was the Everlight,
original.
Sarenrae. After the resurrection ritual succeeded, was basically like, if you want to go back, you can. And that had a profound effect on her.
I mean, I've had a fight end with 3 of the 7, it was a big party, 3 of the 7 PCs dead. And so they had to go into their afterlives because the spirit has to be willing to return and convince them to come back. And literally, had they done the resurrections in a different order, one of them would have chosen not to, because 2 of the characters were in love.
Oh, I'm getting goosebumps.
And if
I love that.
the woman, the bard who was played by my wife and her fiance character, if the fiance character hadn't been alive and there to help convince her to come back, she would have said, no,
I'm gonna stay
it's
in the
so much
afterlife."
worse out there. This is, I'm done. I'm done. And so those moments can be great. But one thing I wanted to touch on because this topic, like you said, big one, character death, consequences. I play a lot of TTRPGs that aren't just D&D. And one of them, or there are a lot of systems that are, as you all know, way more fatal than 5e, especially.
Legend of the Five Rings, baby. That's where I come
Mothership,
from.
Mothership, the average character session, or the average character lives about 4 sessions.
Alien.
Oh, no.
And that's why character creation takes 2 minutes, is because got to make your next character.
You're going to turn through them.
But there can absolutely be consequences without character death. There can be consequences in a game where the table agrees that character death isn't even on the table as a possibility. But I also think there are a lot of tables that fear perma character death too much, in my opinion. And I think that it is a result, and this is in no way to blame actual plays, as if they're bad things. I run one. I love Crit Roll and Dimension 20, but when you're running a campaign that's intended to go 150 sessions, and you're trying to bring audience members back every session, you don't want to kill off your main characters that often. That's why there's been how many permadeaths in Crit Roll in 3 campaigns? 1?
I can count them on one. I can count them on one hand.
I think there's 1.
I think it's just 1, isn't it?
And there's a marketing reason for that. But I think that a lot of people who've been introduced to the hobby that way think that character death is anathema. It's a bad thing and should always be avoided, and if you let it happen, you're a bad DM. No, this is something that should be discussed at session 0. How fatal a game do we want to run? Because there is something to the notion in some stories that the risk of death adds weight to decisions. For example, this isn't a TTRPG, but like comparing the Harry Potter series to Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire. I, at no point, even at age 13, was worried that Harry Potter was going to permadie because there are going to be 7 books, and they're all called Harry Potter. Meanwhile, at the end of the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire, I don't know if anyone is going to live out through their chapter, which made me far more interested in the choices they made.
Real quick, though, I'm sorry. If the last book would have been called Hermione and the Deathly Hallows Part 2,
that would have been.
First of all, that'd have been what a twist. No one would have seen that coming.
Bold.
But I do want to hit on that because I have a lot of thoughts about character death. We do live in an era now where for most tables, I'm going to say, but I think most tables for our demographic, people who listen to this show. We live in an era now where you commission artwork of your character, you write a big character backstory, you get really invested in how your character
is relatively
ties
new
into it.
in the hobby.
And it is because exactly when this hobby was in the 90s and 2000s, you showed up with 5 characters ready to go because you were going to burn through them that night.
I did not give a damn about any of my characters who I played in 3.5 at any point. Like, they're cool and powerful. Yay. Like, that was the extent of it.
But that was it. They're a power trip fantasy. And now I also want to go play this other character who's also a power trip fantasy. So this one needs to go. But we play our characters in the modern era, I feel like, a little bit differently. We're very tight to them. And to that end, I think that a character death that isn't meaningful or, that just kind of happens out of the blue, I have a hard time with. I have killed 2 PCs. And both of them were discussions with the player beforehand. One of them was in one of my actual plays where the player had reached out to me and had said, hey, I think the story beat here is that my character dies and I will play her daughter, who has also been traveling with the party lately. I will take over as her. And I was like, absolutely. I think that's an incredible moment. And it was an incredible moment when it happened. The other one was planned from the beginning where she told me, I want to play this character, but my actual character is her pet Jabberwocky that she built. And that's going to be like a Warforged paladin eventually after she dies. So we planned her death, and I didn't tell her when it was going to happen or the context of how it was going to happen. I just told her it would happen around the end of the first act of the story. And when it did, both her and the party were just like, and she's gone. I'm like, no, she's worse than that. She's a vampire now.
And on that topic, I think that sometimes in content creating spheres, we want to grab people's attention. Sometimes it can be very easy to say, this is the right way to do things, or this is the good way to do things. But ultimately, with almost any advice, the best way to do it is the way that your table enjoys. And so sometimes a quote unquote meaningless character death, if you all have decided we want to play a super fatal game.
Yeah.
Where survival is really hard and we have to be strategic to make our way through it. Sometimes, therefore, all that the meaning the character death brings is a reminder the world's dangerous.
Yeah.
But it depends on the game, and that's why you have to talk with each other beforehand, set up expectations, make sure everyone's on the same page. Session 0 is indispensable because, again, there are systems. The Witcher is another example where healing magic almost doesn't exist. And the injuries include losing limbs and eyes, like lasting real consequences.
Okay, I have to take this segue. I'm sorry. You've mentioned expectations and you've mentioned losing limbs. So this segues perfectly into the sort of last section of this sort of topic here. And that is expectations and why they're important in a game and how to communicate them both in and out of game as a dungeon master and what to look for as a player. Let's go back to Roz losing her arm.
Let's talk about Roz losing her arm because that's just about what I was about to bring up.
Yes, I think there were at least 2 very important NPCs that were set up in a way because one of them was a former Volstrucker agent of the Cerberus Assembly. So essentially he was a magic CIA operative.
Yep. Were you playing you were playing in Exandria?
Yes.
Yep.
We're using Explorer's Guide to Wild Map.
Our Monday game that we do on Twitch at Robbie_Landis on Twitch is where we play that. So this former Volstrucker agent, when they brought up the name of this guy that they were tracking down, gave them a thorough background check on this guy. He's a dangerous man. He has bad news, and even the assassin NPC that they have been playing with, who works for one of the Cerberus Assembly members, was like, we can't take this lightly. Like, I wouldn't go against this guy, like one-on-one or anything like that. Like, we need to be so careful.
Yep.
And what the party decided was, okay, well, when we find him, we don't give him time to react. And so they've been told by me as the DM, in character, by multiple competent PCs,
Yep.
this guy's dangerous.
Yep.
You need to be careful. And then even as the DM, I let them know, like, guys, watch out, right? So they get there, they run up to him, Roz attacks, she smites.
Roz's whole thought is like, we've caught him unawares. Our best opportunity might be like, let's just put him down. Yep.
And after her turn's over, he uses a legendary action to grab her and pull an arm off and throw her at the party.
I got to make saves, of course.
You did, yeah. There were checks in there that she proceeded to fail, which I knew she would.
Because it's me, yeah. But yeah, he wishboned me and literally pulled my arm out of the socket.
There are times where I hear stories of, like a DM will just describe like a magic item, right? Or something. And the character's like, oh, well, I pick it up. Do you? Yes.
Wait, and so then, you touch it? Are you wearing gloves?
Something terrible happens, right?
Right.
Asking them for clarification of, oh, do you touch it, is not defining expectations clearly enough. And I'm not saying that dangerous things can't just happen to the party, but if someone's going to take an action that could result in, at worst, death or some sort of, grievous bodily harm, you need, as the DM, to give them a chance to make some sort, as a player, the character maybe not, but the player needs to be making an informed decision of what it is they're about to do, right? That's expectations, that's consent. These are things that, as you had mentioned in a session 0, should be gone over beforehand, but then just throughout the campaign, make sure you're finding ways to communicate what could happen to your players.
So I got to follow up on that to talk about Rosalind, obviously. I think there's another element to that made that moment work, and that is trust between the table and the DM. Because obviously at that point, you and I have been playing together for a long time. I trust that you pulling Roz's arm off, that you're not going to be like, all right, Callie, so here's the deal. Roz lost her good sword arm, so now she has a -5 penalty to all attacks forever, and there's nothing we're ever going to do to address that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have trust that you didn't pull Roz's arm off lightly, and I mean that in both ways. I mean that to say that you didn't do it as just something that you expect that she's going to slough off.
Yeah.
And also that it's not something that you're going to just say like, well, yeah, get over it. Well,
we had
to treat seriously.
We had to talk. I think it was actually during the session where it's like, look, if this isn't something that you want to explore more, then we will have our druid, who can use healing magic, make some checks, and you might have a penalty, but you can put that arm back on right now.
Yeah, we can reattach it.
You could obviously find someone with regeneration, or if you want to play this out a little bit longer, what eventually happened was she got an adamantium steam cast arm that now she can negate a crit once a day with.
Yep. But I think that having that built trust between there's things that you can do in session 20 that you can't do in session 2, right? You have to take some time, unless it's a group you've played with before, but that you have to take some time to build that level of trust between the DM and the players. And I'll go back to when you had mentioned Ember and her death sequence, right? Where she went and she talked to these various deities and she got to finally get some questions answered about her life. Ember was someone who had made a lot of really bad decisions because she had grown up in really bad circumstances. And when she thought she was a monster and she thought she was someone who was beyond redemption and didn't deserve to live. So when she died, it wasn't that big a deal for her. And in many ways, she was someone who kind of sought her death. And that made it all the more impactful when the party made the save that they needed to bring her back, it was still Ember's choice, ultimately, whether or not she wanted to come back. And now she's made the decision to return to life. Now she has decided to live. And that is so impactful and so important and such a character growth. So yes, did it ultimately not matter that she died because she came back? Well, of course she is back, but it was a huge character growth for her.
And like you mentioned, a lot of this session 0 by defining what type of expectations and game, even just down to which system you all choose to play, because if they choose to play Mothership and they're like, but I don't want character death, well, then we're playing a different system.
Maybe we should try Eclipse
because
phase.
this is part of the game.
Yeah.
And just because, you have agency also doesn't mean you can just say to your DM at any point, no, I don't want those consequences. I just want to succeed. I just want success, always, no failure, no consequences. I'm perfect. But
maybe you should go play Baldur's Gate then.
Yeah. But
you can reload.
The topic you also touched on is signposting within the game. Is
Ooh,
providing
that's
those
good. I've never heard
in-game
that term before. I like that.
Is providing those in-game warnings, and sometimes, like you said, you even do it out of game. We're like, just so you know, y'all. But this actually touches on a question I get asked a lot, specifically about 5e, which is how do you balance it? Yeah. And sometimes
you don't.
Sometimes the answer is don't.
Yeah,
just put what makes sense for the story to be there. And if what makes sense in this cave is an adult dragon and they're level 4, then what is in there might be an adult dragon, but not without any warnings. There might be charred adventurer corpses on the outside, huge claw marks that are 4 inches just thick and all of that. So you give these warnings. Right.
Show a CR10 enemy that has been devoured by what is ever deeper so they know, whatever it is can handle that.
Because again, then they get choice,
yep.
But they get consequences.
Yeah, if they still choose to go fight the dragon.
And then also perhaps, or again, without planning out ideas, providing situations, not solutions, maybe they engage this dragon and get their asses handed to them and have to run. And which of these two scenarios is more satisfying? Level 4 characters walk into an adult green dragon's lair and kill it on their first time. Or level 4 characters walk into an adult green dragon's cave, get the butts kicked, regroup and go, okay, we are not powerful enough and not well equipped enough. And so
we'll see you in
10 sessions later, maybe they come with half an army at their back, a new weapon, some new training, and they manage to kill or drive off the dragon.
But DM interest. They went in and they sassed a dragon. He wouldn't put up with that. He has to eat all of them on the spot.
No, he doesn't.
I mean, he certainly might, if, again, with consequences, if someone does go in there and start sassing off to the dragon, you then get to give warnings of the low rumble of the dragon, of the look of hunger and disgust in its eye, and the realization that you are physically ants compared to this thing. And if you still then, Bard, choose to be a sassy asshole.
We're talking to you, bards.
You then get to go okay, just so you know, if you do this and you roll this persuasion check, if you fail, there could very well be long-lasting and fatal consequences to this action.
To the DMs out there who think that they need to TPK when that stuff happens, no. I'm telling you, even if you say now, well, they remember it was still a great moment. Eating one of them and then the dragon being like, well, lucky for you, I just ate a herd of cattle, so I'm full, and I'm tired of adventurers like you coming in every week and bothering me. So here you go. Spits up the skull of your friend still smoking. Take this, go back to whatever village you crawled out of, and let them know the next party that comes in here isn't going to just be a snack.
Because
you do not need to DP, even if it's the BBGs.
What is our goal?
Yes.
What is our goal? Our goal is to tell an interesting, memorable, cool story. Sometimes that will result in a TPK.
Could.
At the BBEG. And that can be really epic and interesting and memorable and cool.
Especially when the next campaign is the kids of those heroes.
Or the next group that gets hired, or 100 years later when the world has been taken over by that BBEG and we get to look at the consequences of your failures. Look at what you hath wrought. That is interesting and cool. But again, if it's just TPK to teach a lesson, we can teach lessons outside by talking to each other like adults and say, hey, just so you know, this direction, not cool. I'm not like, let's change things up. This isn't fitting the tone of the game that we agreed on. That's so much better than using in-game punishment to fix an out-of-game problem.
I think, too, you can do a lot of really interesting ways of punishing players. And the most effective ones aren't like your character goes to jail or your character is dead. If you have a character who murder hobos somebody, right? They decide they're just going to kill this person for no reason. Don't arrest them. Don't have them get caught. Have that character younger sister show up and be horrifically disappointed in the person their older brother has become.
And it depends.
And watch them change their tune.
It depends on the player. Some people respond better to that whole emotional appeal, but a totally fitting consequence is you just killed this merchant and someone else, as you're still wiping the blood off of your dagger, opens the shop door, sees this, looks terrified,
wide-eyed,
and goes running to get the guards. Cool. You all are no longer welcome in this town. Mm-hmm. And they're starting to put notices up about you. You're going to have to shift from murderer. You now shift from the contract killers to the contract. And that's interesting. Yep. Those consequences are more interesting than cool, you're all dead, new game.
Or you're all in jail.
Yeah, I think on that we can all agree. Any
now that
final
said, again, some systems like Mothership.
Yes.
TPKs
What
happen.
we do
I had 3 players kill each other. And that was the end of their story. Like, cool. All right. Neat. But memorable.
Yes. And look, we bill ourselves as a D&D show because that's where the SEO is and that's what brings the views in. But I think a lot of what we talk
Sorry, we live in a capitalistic society.
I have to use hashtag D&D when making videos about Mothership or Pathfinder.
Unfortunately.
Or no one sees it.
Yep. But you can learn a lot about different systems that can be applied then to a lot of other different systems. So
which is why you should try other systems.
100%.
It's good for you. Even if you go back to D&D and say, this is my system of choice forever.
You will bring things back with you.
If you only listen to one musical genre, you don't have as well-trained an ear for things. You won't notice certain references to jazz or whatever it may be. But if you play these other systems, learn what you like, learn what you don't like. I had one player who was in the Mothership game, who at the end of it, after all their characters died, and we were doing a decompress, said, this is the system I think every player should start with, because you're going to fail more than you succeed, just mathematically. And so it forces you to not fear it and to embrace it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of good that can come from playing other systems with entirely different mentalities.
You know, Ironsworn is the same way, because
yes, it is.
In Ironsworn, you always have the option, or almost always, I should say, have the option when you fail a check to say, I actually succeed, but. And it forces you to think of consequences of both success and opportunities that come from failure.
That's probably the biggest and sort of general thing that I take just from other games and use in D&D is just getting rid of the idea of like a binary pass
fail. Yeah.
And always thinking about degrees of success or degrees of failure.
I mean, I like to do that even for skill checks. Like,
absolutely.
Make me a history check on this.
A
10 gets them this, 15 gets them this, 20 gets them this, 25.
Yeah, normally when they ask for some sort of knowledge-related check, I will give them a base, regardless of what you roll. Right. And then based on how well you roll, I will allow you to ask clarifying questions that your character may also know. And you can even sort of hold on. Like maybe at this time, you don't really have any other clarifying questions. Hold on to those questions then. And as you go along, if you want more answers, I'll give them to you.
Yeah,
right, not to cut people off here.
No,
we are about at the 49-minute mark, and there's something new that I would like us to try here. And we're gonna do some Am I the Assholes? Now, I do want to give some credit where credit is due. It was the Eldritch Pod Blast that kind of inspired us to do this. But we're not taking these from Reddit. We have asked our community in our Discord, which if you go to any of our social medias, I have a shirt that says Dungeon Daddy. For everyone on the podcast, was that a pin or a sticker?
It's just it's a piece of metal.
Oh, just a piece of metal that says Dungeon Daddy. So we asked our community, and if you want to potentially be a part of these, we want to start doing these in our shows now. You can go and join us on our Discord, find us on social media, Tumblr, Threads, Instagram, TikTok for now, YouTube, Cloaks and Capes, and there should be links there. I'll make sure of it after this. But they wrote out Am I the Assholes from the perspective of their character in their respective worlds and stories. So we're going to read a few of those.
Bring it on.
The first one comes from Patoran of the Legendary Defenders, spelled Dairy. Am I the asshole for taking the Ring of Winter from the body of an evil sorcerer and wearing it to help bring down the remaining members of the Arcanum Postatum? Postatum, that's the word. I didn't realize it was going to slowly corrupt me and make me do some questionable things, like tell Xanathar that one of our contacts, who happened to be the head of a rival crime league, was hiding in the Feywild, or rat out the clan ogres who were trying to mutiny against the trio of red dragons that were holding my friend hostage. I certainly didn't realize that it would force me to attack my friends and the Lord of Dragonspear. Thankfully, I was able to remove the ring and hand it over before anything permanent happened, but it was also a very useful tool in defeating a number of our foes, including the green adult dragon we felled in the Neverwinter Woods. So is Patoran the asshole here?
Ethan, I'll give you first.
I don't think you can be the asshole if you didn't know that was a risk. If all you saw was potential benefits as an outcome and you wanted to use this. I mean, again, hearkening back to Boromir, he didn't see the corrupting potential of the ring. All he saw was, this can help save my people. That's not an asshole move. Trying to steal it from Frodo's a bit of an asshole move. But in this case, if all you saw was a potential for power and you wanted to use it for good, it sounds like not an asshole.
Yeah, I'm going to say not the asshole, but definitely an idiot. If you don't take magic rings off of evil sorcerers.
Not without casting Identify, even though that doesn't show curses.
Yeah,
but
that's
still,
not a good plan. That's not how you live a long and happy life.
I want that on a t-shirt. Don't take magic rings off of evil wizards.
No, that's a recipe for disaster.
Especially if you can look at history, like if the information's available to you and that evil wizard wasn't always evil.
Yeah.
And there was a sudden turn and everyone's like, boy, sure don't know what happened to him.
I think it's worse if there was not a sudden turn, if they just slowly became evil. That's a corrupting influence.
That's what I mean. If at some point that wizard was in good standing or considered a hero, and now they're not, you need to ask the questions, why?
Why? Yeah, no, not the asshole, definitely an idiot.
All right, sounds good. All right, one more. This one comes from Soul Parakew, local pretty changeling, self-proclaimed posh twat.
Is this Callista?
Am I the asshole for trying to seduce a literal god after drinking liquid mana? Here's the story. It's the BBEG fight. There are pools of glowing blue liquid around. I decided, as I have no impulse control, to drink some of it. Little did I know, it fucking burns out my nerves, and after the fight, now high on literal magic liquid, I decided to seduce a goddess. I succeeded, and now my party's getting angry at me for spending all of my time in a demi-plane doing the devil's tango with a god. Clarification, the goddess in question is the main one of the pantheon. It's structured like a sort of orchestra symphony, and she would be considered the conductor.
Well, I'll go first this time.
Yeah, of course you will.
Yeah, I mean, this is now we're talking about blatant thirst. Absolutely, we're in my domain now. I'm gonna go with not the asshole, obviously. Obviously. No, listen. So you're familiar with the concept of a hall pass, right? Where it's like, hey, if I run into this person, it doesn't matter that I'm married. It's okay. Like if my wife runs into Jonathan Bailey and he says, you know what, I'm gay, but I've decided I need to at least give women a try. You're the one. Yeah, I'm not going to be mad at her when she sleeps with Jonathan Bailey. Go do your thing and then tell me how it was and ask if I can join.
One degree of separation, then.
So should we be giving party hall passes? You're okay to screw over the party if
you have the opportunity to fuck God, you got it. Statistically speaking, you have to do it.
All right. You're biased. Ethan, please save us.
I will say that for the first instance, you're not an asshole, but God, you're so horny. Yeah, we get it. We get it. There's something I have to sleep with it.
But
the repeated ones,
cool.
The repeated ones, when your party's trying to accomplish things, then yeah, your character's being an asshole because they're going and getting throw it back
devil's
instead
tango, as
of
they say,
helping out, then and it doesn't matter that it's a god. This could be a normal human. And if you're just spending all your time in the bedroom while the rest of your crew is like, so quests, experience, like world saving?
Beg to differ. It does matter that it's a god. If you're doing it for a normal human, you're the asshole. If it's God, listen. Okay,
so
how about
the D
this
just has to be good enough.
Here's the compromise.
Yeah, no. Here's the compromise. Here's what it is.
You're not the asshole. Third party impartial.
You're not the asshole, but you're also an NPC now. How about that?
There we go.
My compromise is going to be you can, but you don't. When they gain the levels, you don't. You have to be there. We're going to an XP system now.
Old school leveling.
Well, no, it can still be a milestone system. You're just no longer present for the milestones.
Yeah.
And they might rightfully say, I found the only milestone I'm ever going to need.
In which case, like you said, NPC time, because, and I know we're short on time, but this is a general concept. There are times when the natural path of a PC's story leads to them no longer being with the group.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's okay. You don't have to kill off the character in order for the character to no longer be with the group. Mm-hmm. They become an NPC. Mine now.
Now they belong
that's
to
a
me.
whole great future topic that we'll have to have you back for, Ethan. But that is the end here. I'm pretty sure that's going to end up being probably our longest episode
for sure.
yet. Thank you so much, Ethan. Please go ahead and let everybody know, where they can find you. If you have any upcoming projects or anything you'd like them to check out, the floor is yours.
So if you want to see more of like TTRPG advice and theory content, that's really heavy on my TikTok, the Buff DM. But if you want to actually listen to our games, we have an actual play podcast called Go Buff Yourself. So that is available anywhere you can get your podcasts. We have numerous campaigns on there, including a run of Wild Beyond the Witchlight in 5e. We have a retelling of the Curse of Strahd story using the Savage World system, putting it into a noir city with a femme Strahd, or Stradia. And boy, she's awesome. We also have a 5-shot of Mothership and several other 1-shots on there. So all your listening needs to get you through folding laundry. So if you can also follow our cosplay content, because I wear many hats, anywhere as Thousand Faces Cosplay. So, thank you all so much for having me on.
And we'll have all of the handy convenient links in the show description as well. And if you have maybe only just discovered us through this podcast, be it on YouTube or Spotify or wherever, make sure that you go and check out our social medias and our Patreon, Cloaks and Capes. We create magic items one a day. By the time this is out, we should be over 800 magic items available there. And we're working up to releasing all 12 of our subclasses. Most recently, our Warrior of the Streets Monk and our Creation Domain Cleric are out there. So go and check those out.
You can finally be like the shit-talking street brawler. You don't have to be a monk that's all about kung fu mystic arts.
Yep. And we also have a free tier on our Patreon as well. So if you're like, I don't want to sign up for that monthly stuff, that's fine. Go sign up for free and you can still get cool things.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you, Ethan, and thank you everybody for tuning in. So until next time, keep watching, keep listening.
The Cloaks and Capes podcast is created by the support of its listeners and generous Patreon donors. Special thanks to our myth makers and legends, Heartslot, Dolvik, Celtic Crow, Darkflux, Gamergal, Strix River, Tater Thoughts, and Capelli. Views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of its hosts. Editing and production by Aaron Pillen and music provided by Aidan Hageland. If you want to support the Cloaks and Capes podcast, check out our Patreon over at patreon.com/Cloaks and Capes. And check us out on Threads and Instagram at Cloaks and Capes TTRPG. Oh, I love that. That's cute. Yeah. That's actually brilliant. I love that.
It doesn't have vocal cords. Fuck it. It can do it. How's this one? No, should I go with this? Is this better? Yeah.